I met Felix 4 years ago, on one of those autumn days when the air smells of damp leaves and the sky hangs heavily over the city, as if it were going to pour down rain, but never quite makes up its mind. He was standing at the counter of a cafe, dressed in a dark blue sweater, with slightly disheveled hair and a smile that seemed too sincere to be a mask. He turned around and, as if it were a matter of course, offered me his cappuccino, because the barista obviously lost count, and now we have two. At the time, I thought it was funny, and without thinking much, I agreed, not realizing that this was the beginning of something much stranger than just a chance acquaintance. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy. Felix was charming, sweet, and childishly funny, the kind of man who, without knowing why, makes you feel safe, as if he could protect you from all the storms of the world with his mere presence. He knew how to listen, laugh at the right moments, and say things that stuck in your memory because there was some real, rare depth behind his words. It seemed to me that he was the one who would eventually become a wonderful husband, calm, patient, kind. The only thing I didn't know then was his real connection with the one he always called simply Mom, but whose name I learned later with an unpleasant aftertaste, Beatrice. At first these were trifles, such that you could not attach any importance to them. She called him every night before he went to bed, and their conversations were long, with quiet giggles and tender intonations, as if there were no years or obligations between them, just the eternal we, she and he. She had a key to his apartment, which he mentioned casually, as if it were normal, and a month later I once caught her in the kitchen when she decided to clean up a little, because the boy was a mess again. Then for the first time I felt a slight pang of awkwardness, but quickly convinced myself that this was simply a manifestation of maternal care, a little excessive, perhaps, but still innocent. She paid his bills, despite the fact that he had a stable job and a decent income, called me Felix's little friend, as if I were some kind of temporary entertainment, a toy that would soon become boring. We had been dating for a year before I saw her for the first time, and I thought she might just be one of those mothers who held on to her sons too tightly, especially if she was raising them alone. I told myself it wasn't a red flag, just a quirk. That was my first mistake, trying to justify something that was questionable from the start, trying to normalize something that was strange and scary. When Felice proposed, I naively hoped that from that moment on, everything would change. But as soon as the cherished yes was uttered, Beatrice seemed to flip some internal switch, activating demon mode, deciding that the wedding was now her personal project, her battleground, and the stage on which she would shine. She took charge of planning everything, from the date to the color palette, and if I suggested one thing, she invariably wanted the other, as if playing some tiresome game of opposites. If I named a date, she would suddenly become emotionally attached to another. If I suggested a place, it seemed too cold, too noisy, too different. And Felice, he would just sit there, look at me with a guilty smile and say, "Mom just wants to help." Help. And at that moment, I would begin to doubt, did he really see what was happening, or was he just pretending that everything was fine? Beatrice chose my wedding dress herself, without my knowledge, and I didn't see it for the first time until the morning of my own wedding, when it was already hanging on a hanger in my hotel room with a note, "You will look beautiful in it. B." She changed the menu, calling the caterer behind my back, and then rearranged the seating arrangement so that she would sit next to Felice at the very altar. And she accompanied all this with phrases like, "This wedding is not just for the two of you, it is for our family," said with such sincerity that I became afraid. Then I should have run. I should have understood the hint, seen the signal, realized the scale of the catastrophe, but I, like the last idiot, convinced myself that after the wedding everything would settle down, that she would back off. This was my second mistake. It wasn't a wedding, it was Beatrice's own Broadway show, carefully staged, overdramatic, with lines honed to the point of painful falsehood, and in every scene of it she was the star, while I, forgotten and overshadowed, felt like a supporting character in a story that I naively thought was supposed to be about love. She appeared in a white, puffy wedding dress, laced in shimmering lace, and her stride was stately, like an actress walking onto a stage under the spotlight, not like a woman coming to celebrate the wedding of her son, my supposed future husband. She gave my father a speech, delivered with a tremor in her voice and tears carefully timed to the moment, in which she unabashedly called Felix the greatest love of my life, making him look at her with a tenderness that made me want to disappear. And then she danced with him during our first dance, the one that, by unspoken rule, should belong only to the bride and groom, and, finding herself in his arms, she laid her head on his chest, as if he were her boy again, never growing up, never breaking away, forever hers. I was a stranger at my own wedding, a guest at a play for which I had somehow not noticed the tickets during rehearsals. But the worst thing was not that, but the fact that Felix had allowed it all to happen, had watched it all with that same meaningless, tired smile, as if he couldn't or wouldn't intervene, as if it were all perfectly normal. I told myself that this was the last time she could do that after today there would be only us, him and me, without intermediaries, without the shadows of the past. That was my second mistake, the foolish belief that boundaries were set by themselves, that love would find its own way. Felice and I went on our honeymoon, to a place that was supposed to be ours, where no one would know his mother, our address, or the color of the tablecloths at our wedding. I thought that finally we would be alone, away from her voice, her looks, her invisible presence that permeated our every conversation. We hadn't even been in the hotel room for 3 hours when his phone vibrated with the first message. "Did you land safely? What's your room number?" And although the sender's name was unmarked, I had no doubts. I looked at him, and he laughed, as if to justify himself. "She's just nervous." That evening, we ordered room service, unpacked, poured wine, and were just beginning to get used to the silence when there was a knock on the door. I assumed it was cleaning. He opened it without thinking, without even looking through the peephole. And there she was, Beatrice, standing at the threshold of our honeymoon suite, her suitcase worthy of a 3-week cruise beside her. "Surprise," she sang, with the intonation of a woman who takes such intrusions for granted, and walked inside as if she, not I, were the bride. I froze. I couldn't even form a sentence, because words seemed too useless. "But, Felice," I breathed, and he just smirked. "Mom, you really came." "Come." "Really? Come." His reaction was not shock, but recognition. He knew. He damn well knew. And he let her come anyway. "Of course, darling," she said, kissing his cheek. "I couldn't leave you here alone. What if I need you?" Then she turned to me and looked through me, as if I were furniture. "Please call the front desk." "I need fresh towels," she said, her tone icy, as if I really were her maid. I turned to Felix, waiting for some hint of intervention, a gesture, a look, anything, but he had already grabbed her suitcase. At that very moment, in the silent, echoing hotel, in the wall of indifference and quiet betrayal, I realized that I was the third wheel in this marriage, unwanted, superfluous, non-existent. I was never supposed to be the first, and probably never will be. Beatrice had not stolen my husband, he was not mine. He had been hers all along, and I was simply trying to take someone else's place. I took a deep breath, took my wedding ring off my finger, placed it in his palm, pressed it with my fingers and whispered, "Then marry her," and then turned and walked toward the exit. I expected him to stop me, to shout, to chase me, to say something, anything, but nothing happened. I reached the elevator and was about to press the call button when I heard his voice, "Baby, wait." I turned around and saw him running out into the hallway, his face a mixture of confusion, panic, and, most strikingly, mild amusement, as if this were all just some strange, ridiculous misunderstanding. "Why are you acting like this?" he asked, and there was no recognition or remorse in his voice, only confusion. "Your mother just ruined our honeymoon, Felice. Do you realize how crazy that is?" I hissed, feeling the rage rising inside me. He sighed and rubbed the back of his head, as if I were another complicated problem he needed to solve. "She just cares about us. She spent all this money on the wedding, she didn't want to miss out on the chance to see us happy. She just—" I held up my hand, stopping his stream of nonsense. "If you tell me now that she's just trying to help, I swear to God," I began, and he seemed to understand, because his jaw clenched. "What was I supposed to do?" he snapped, suddenly going on the offensive. "She already bought a ticket, made a reservation, without asking. I didn't invite her. She just did it. It worked." I looked at him, and only one thing was beating in my head, "But you didn't say no to her either." His face twitched, as if the thought hadn't even occurred to him. You don't say no to my mother, baby. You just work with her. There it was. What I had been too blind to notice, what had been hiding under the surface like a speck of dust you can't feel until you rub your eyes. Felice had never married me, because his soul, his habits, his affections, even his ideas about family from childhood had been built around one woman, the one who had given birth to him, raised him, and molded him to suit herself. As the perfect copy of the future husband he became not for me, but for her. I was the extra part, unplanned, ill-fitting, like the wrong piece in a machine, too independent to fit in without complaint. Turning, I pressed the elevator button, and though my hands were shaking slightly, I no longer had any doubts. Baby, seriously, he laughed behind me, but there was a hardness to it, hidden, sharp as a knife under a pillow. Are you really going to leave because of this? I didn't answer. The elevator opened with a soft swish of doors. Come on, he said, lowering his voice, don't be like that. Don't make a scene. The word scene hit me like a slap, too loud, too humiliating to swallow. Scene. I repeated, my voice shaking traitorously. Felix, your mother booked a flight, packed her things, and is now hanging out her laundry in the room that was supposed to be ours. And you think I'm making a scene? He opened his mouth, then closed it, and without waiting for his next explanation, I stepped into the elevator. Where are you going? He asked, more quietly, almost in a whisper. Where your mother isn't, I answered, and the doors closed like a curtain hiding an actress tired of playing someone else's role. I had no plan, no clear thought, only a distinct, painfully clear feeling that I needed to get out, to break free from this web in which I had gotten myself entangled, thinking that this was family comfort. I reached the lobby, took out my phone and blocked his number first, then Beatrice's. My fingers were shaking, but there was a strange, almost physical lightness in this action, as if I had cut an invisible rope tightly pulled around my throat. I headed for the front desk and stopped in front of the concierge, a young man with tired eyes and a tie that had long since lost its shape, and said, I need a new room. Away from the honeymoon suite. He raised an eyebrow, still polite but slightly surprised. Miss, what about your husband? He's not my husband anymore, I replied calmly. That got his full attention. Right. Let's see what we have, he said, looking at the screen as I stood there, my heart pounding, clutching my bag as if it were my only connection to reality. That's when I heard it, a voice that made my chest tighten like a sudden cold. Darling, she said, and I turned just as Beatrice approached me in a silk dress that fluttered around her ankles, as if she were attending an embassy reception rather than a trial. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear, but my legs would not move. Are you lost? She asked, bowing her head, as if I were a child about to go to bed and she a mother about to tuck me in. I clenched my fists. No, I said. She sighed with mock sympathy, and there was so much tired superiority in that sigh that I almost felt sick. Look, darling, I know how overwhelming it is to get married. It's a big step. But running off like that, that's immature. That's not how a wife behaves. I clenched my teeth, so hard my temples rang. Wife? Whose wife, Beatrice? You? Because Felisa, as you well know, I never had. He was never mine. Her lips pursed, as if I'd said something obscene. You're being dramatic. I almost laughed. You flew across the country, ruined our honeymoon, moved into our hotel room, and you're telling me I'm being dramatic? What do you want? She blinked, as if I'd asked a question she'd never thought of before. I want to make sure he's okay, she said. And there it was, the answer that told her everything. Not you, just him. I took a step forward. He's a grown man. Not a child. He doesn't need his mother to hold his hand on his honeymoon. She tensed. I raised him alone, she said, as if that phrase justified everything she did. I made him what he is. I'm not going to let some girl come along and kick me out of his life. Girl? I asked, my voice shaking, but not with fear. Do you think I'm playing house, Beatrice? That I married Felix to play daughter? Do you have any idea what a real marriage is? Because this weird, clingy, obsessive relationship you have with your son is not him. Her face went stony, her features rigid. Take care of yourself, dear, she said, her voice icy. You don't want to turn Felix against you. I raised my eyebrows, almost laughing in surprise. Do you really think that's a threat? That I'm afraid he'll choose you over me? Beatrice, I'll tell you a terrible secret. He never chose. He was always yours. I was just a convenient facade for a fairy tale in which he was the good son who made his mother happy. Her eyes narrowed, and I saw the same shadows play across her face that must have once frightened teachers at school, neighbors in the building, anyone who dared to doubt her for a second, and she said with a stinging coldness, as if giving an order, "You're acting like a child. Go upstairs, apologize to my son, and act like a real wife. Or don't come back at all." At that moment, my head began to spin, not from rage, not from fear, but from the realization, finally complete, expanded, painfully clear. Beatrice did not just want to be near, did not just interfere, did not just show excessive care. She wanted to control everything. She wanted to have power, complete, limitless, unconditional, and Felix, raised by her from birth, taught to obey, love, and thank for any interference, simply allowed her to do this, allowed voluntarily, without resistance. With a childish obedience in which there was no room for me or for us. I took a deep breath to calm the trembling in my voice, so as not to break down, not to roll into a scream, not to give her another reason to call me hysterical. "You're right," I said quietly, and she smiled, slowly, with the satisfaction of a winner who knows he has achieved his goal and is already savoring the taste of someone else's defeat. "I'm not coming back at all," I added, sharp as a blow, and before she could process it, I turned and walked away, feeling the blood pounding in my temples, my knees buckling, but I kept going because I knew now that I was done, that this was my choice, and it was final. As I approached the front desk, the concierge, the guy with the dark circles under his eyes, looked up at me with hesitation, as if he was trying to find a polite way to say what he was about to say. Miss, we have a problem." I exhaled sharply, squeezing my shoulders. "What now?" I asked, trying not to sound tired. He glanced at the screen. "Your reservation has been cancelled." My stomach twisted painfully. "What do you mean, cancelled?" I stared at him, gripping the edge of the counter. He cleared his throat. "It sounds like your husband called ahead. Said you wouldn't need the room." I squeezed my eyes shut. Of course. Of course he'd done this. Of course it was a trap. First the ring, then the wedding, the honeymoon, now this. It had all been set up like a system, like a machine that worked without fail. "Okay," I said, forcing my voice to be calm. "Then I'll book another room." He shook his head. "Sorry. The hotel is fully booked. It's peak season." I stared at him, disbelieving. "No, yes, ma'am. Sorry." My ears were clogged. Beatrice's voice was like an echo inside me, impossible to shut up now, or don't come back at all. This wasn't just a whim of Felix's. It was a plan. Planned in advance, precise, methodical, like an operation. She had closed all the doors, blocked all the escape routes. I had no bed, no money, no safety. I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking. I opened the banking app, my mind racing with only one thought. I needed a plan, I needed a way out. But everything related to our honeymoon, the flight, the hotel, the bills, was in his name. The credit card, too. I checked my personal card. There was enough for a one-way ticket, but not for a hotel, not for a new beginning. I had two choices: go back up to Felix and Beatrice and let this woman destroy me completely, or find another way out, even if it was difficult. I wasn't going to go back. I walked out of the hotel without looking back and took an Uber straight to the airport. I didn't have a ticket, but I didn't care. I had to get out, no matter what. As I got into the car, my phone vibrated. Felice. 23 missed calls. I ignored them. Then a text came from an unknown number. "Don't make this worse. You're embarrassing us. I laughed, a real, loud, ugly laugh, filled with anger and exhaustion. Did she really think I cared? Did she still believe I was playing by her rules? But as soon as we pulled up to the airport, I felt my chest tighten because I saw a familiar figure standing near the entrance. Felice. And he wasn't alone. Beatrice was standing next to him, still straight, collected, calm, too calm, like someone who knows she's won. I abruptly asked the driver to stop at another terminal, hoping to avoid them, hoping to disappear before they saw me. But as soon as I opened the door, a voice called out from behind me, "Baby." I turned, my heart pounding. He looked tired, his eyes sunken, wearing the same pants and shirt I'd left him in at the hotel. He really did look like he hadn't slept in a few nights. She didn't. Her hair was slicked back, pulled together like she'd just stepped out of a salon, and there was something unsettling in her eyes, a certainty that she was indisputable. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, and there was more confusion in his voice than anger. "Why are you running?" I looked at him, and for the first time I saw not the man I loved, but a boy, lost, dependent, unable to escape from under her wing. "Because this isn't a marriage, Felice," I said slowly. "You and Mom are playing house, and I'm sitting in the corner watching the spectacle." He blinked, unsure of what to say. "It's not fair," I added. He opened his mouth as if to protest. "Felice," I continued, "do you even love me? Or are you just glad I didn't leave sooner?" He didn't answer. He opened his mouth, and closed it. And then Beatrice stepped forward, her gait measured, her gaze unwavering, and her voice, when she finally spoke, was smooth as silk, cool as fresh ice carefully poured into a crystal goblet. "Darling," she said, looking at Felice but for some reason addressing me, "we can fix this. Running away is not the answer." "Running away?" I said. "You're going to regret this," I repeated, feeling a wave of anger rise up and coursing through every cell of my body. "You locked me out of a hotel, canceled my reservation, followed me to the airport, and all the while you kept talking about running away, like I was some bride with a rumpled veil who had fled the church instead of someone you two had trapped." She didn't even blink, but her voice had a menacing drawl. "You'll regret this," she said, and a shiver ran down my spine, as if there was more to her words than just irritation. Then Travis, the lawyer, or maybe the assistant, or just a well-trained puppet in their act, stepped forward and handed me a dark blue folder. "Just read it," he said evenly. I hesitated, but then I opened it, and the world around me seemed to stop. There, between the neat pages, was a contract, a prenuptial agreement drawn up without my knowledge, in which, in small print, it was stated in black and white that if our marriage ended within 12 months of the date of registration, would receive nothing, no share of the joint property, no financial obligations, no shares, no agreements, no support. I looked up at Felix in horror. "You lied to me," I whispered. He shook his head, too quickly, as if he wanted to push away all the guilt. "No, it's just. Mom said it was protection. She didn't want you to. So you knew," I interrupted, and there was no longer a tremor in my voice, only icy clarity. He went pale. "You knew all along." I looked down at the papers again, but the lines were already blurring, running together, as if the world I had tried to believe in was falling apart before my eyes. I had married a man who had begun planning my exit before I had even said yes. Beatrice grinned, pleased, like a hunter who has finally cornered her prey. "There, honey," she said, "why don't we all go back to the hotel and talk about this like adults?" I looked her in the eye, straight at her, not looking away. "I'd rather jump in the ocean," I said. And then, before any of them could move, I turned and ran. I didn't know where. I didn't know how. But I knew I had to go. My sandals slapped the tiles, the wind tugged at my hair, I dodged travelers, pushed through the crowd, my heart pounding in my chest like an escape drum. A voice came from behind me, a cry of alarm and panic. "Name." It was Felice. But I didn't turn around. I had one chance. I knew if they caught me again, especially her, if she touched me, if she spoke in that tone, I wouldn't get away. I ran to the check-in counter. Next flight to LAX, I breathed, handing my ID to the agent. The uniformed woman looked at me in surprise, then began typing quickly. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" she asked. "No," I said, but I nodded. The earliest flight was in 2 hours. There was one seat left. "I'll take it." I swiped my card. It worked. A minute later, I had my boarding pass in my hand, and then I heard the voice I didn't want to hear more than anything. "What are you doing?" And I turned around, my fingers gripping the paper so tightly that it almost tore. There they were, Felix, breathing heavily, with eyes that were a mixture of pleading, fear, and, for some reason, a shadow of hope, and Beatrice, still as perfect, her arms folded across her chest, calm as a statue. "I'm leaving," I said, and my voice was clear, firm. Felix took a step toward me. "We can fix this." "No, Felix, we can't." His face twisted in pain. "I love you." I looked at him, and pain shot through my chest, but with it came understanding. "No, Felix, you love her." I nodded toward Beatrice, who wasn't even hiding her grin, victorious, nasty, confident. "It's not fair," he whispered. "She's my mother." "I can't just, you can," I interrupted. "You just don't want to." Beatrice sighed dramatically, bowing her head as if listening to a boring opera. "That's pathetic," she said. "Your pride will ruin a perfect marriage." I laughed, loudly, unexpectedly. My pride? I turned to Felix, no longer in pain but in weariness. "Tell me honestly, if I hadn't found that contract, would you ever have told me about it?" He froze. That was all. His silence was my answer. "It wasn't my idea," he forced out, as if that meant anything. "It was Mom. She just didn't want you to go too soon." I raised my eyebrows. "So you let her plot your marriage like a business deal?" "What next, Felix? Was I supposed to stay another 6 months? A year? Get a gold star if I live to see our anniversary?" He winced, as if my words had finally pierced the invisible curtain he had been hiding behind all this time, the thin film of self-deception in which Beatrice had so carefully wrapped his mind so that he would never notice where love ended and dependence began. Beatrice rolled her eyes with such demonstrative weariness, as if I were an annoying noise in a restaurant that was ruining her appetite, and said, "You're being dramatic," with the same icy contempt with which arrogant people discount the pain of others. "You ruined our honeymoon, Beatrice," I blurted out, and my voice, escaping from my lips, rolled through the airport building, bouncing off the glass walls, causing several people to turn around, as if I had unwittingly become the center of a new dramatic performance. "You intruded on every moment of our relationship. You picked out my wedding dress, you changed the location of the ceremony, and you sat next to Felix at the altar as if I didn't exist, as if the whole show was just for you." Her face darkened like the sky before a storm, and there was a hidden rage there, the same one she usually hid behind smooth speech and forced smiles. "You don't understand," she began, but I interrupted. "No, I do. You don't want Felice to get married because then he won't be yours alone. Because if he gets a wife, you won't have power." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Felice swallowed, his eyes darting between us like a child caught between two feuding parents, but I looked at him one last time. "You had a choice, Felice," I said, feeling the pain build, but also the release. "And you did it." I just finally saw it. His eyes filled with tears, and he whispered, "Please don't do this. I can change." And part of me, the part that still remembered him laughing, holding my hand in the cafe, almost believed him. But then I looked at Beatrice, standing a little ways away, her expression frozen, waiting, watching, ready to take him back the moment I backed away. And I knew he would never choose me. I took a step back. "Goodbye, Felice," I said, and he straightened, as if my words had physically hurt him. Beatrice sighed, exasperated. Well, it was a waste of time. But when Felice turned to her, his face changed, and for the first time in a long time, it was not just pain but also awareness, as if he had finally seen what he hadn't seen for years, that all this had not been about his happiness, but about control. "Mom," he said, almost a whisper. She tensed. "What?" she said, puzzled, but he was already looking straight into her eyes. "Why did you do it?" he asked, and his voice trembled, but not from fear. She chuckled. "Are you really that blind?" "I did it for you." He shook his head. "No. You did it for yourself." Her face went pale, her breath caught, and for a second she lost the composure she had held with an iron grip, but then she hardened again. "You're just upset," she said coldly. "You'll see things differently soon." And with that she turned and walked away, lightly, as if it had all been just an unfortunate encounter, as if we had never meant anything, neither me, nor him, nor this love that had turned into a trap. Felice stood there, stunned, watching her disappear into the crowd of people, and then, for the first time in a long time, I saw him truly alone. I turned away and walked toward my gate. My heart ached, my hands were shaking, but inside there was one feeling, not grief, not resentment, but freedom. I lost my husband, but I got myself back. And for the first time since the wedding, I felt like I was breathing. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.